Vikram Sharma's wedding night began with a champagne toast and ended with him using his bride's sacred Mangalsutra necklace as a murder weapon. But what the quantum computing millionaire discovered in his luxury Sydney hotel suite wasn't just his wife's betrayal. It was evidence of an $8.2 million theft that would expose Australia's most sophisticated marriage fraud empire. If you're fascinated by how international crime syndicates exploit love and tradition to destroy lives, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more shocking true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about trust and betrayal. But let's go back to where it all began. On February 14th, 2024, when Sydney's most exclusive wedding celebration was about to become the city's most shocking murder case, the Crown Tower's presidential suite had been transformed into a golden paradise that perfectly blended Indian tradition with Australian luxury. Marigold garlands draped from crystal chandeliers while the scent of jasmine and sandalwood incense mingled with the salt air drifting in from Sydney Harbour. 200 guests in their finest silk saris and embroidered sherwanis filled the opulent space, their jewelry glittering like stars against the backdrop of the Opera House and Harbour Bridge. This was the wedding of Ishika Mehta and Vikram Sharma, and it represented everything the immigrant dream was supposed to achieve. Ishika, 26 years old and radiant in her red and gold lehenga, sat beside the sacred fire as the pundit chanted ancient Sanskrit verses. Her hands were decorated with intricate mehndi patterns that had taken 8 hours to complete, and her neck was adorned with a heavy gold Mangalsutra that would later become the instrument of her death. She looked like a Bollywood princess, which was exactly what everyone believed her to be. But beneath the surface of this perfect bride lay secrets that would destroy multiple lives and expose a criminal network spanning 3 continents. Vikram Sharma, 34 years old and one of Australia's leading quantum computing specialists, represented the pinnacle of immigrant success. His journey from a middle-class family in Mumbai to a multi-millionaire tech entrepreneur in Sydney had taken 15 years of relentless dedication. His startup, Quantum Logic Solutions, had recently secured $12 million in venture capital funding, making him one of the youngest Indian-born tech millionaires in Australia. His harborside penthouse, collection of luxury cars, an investment portfolio worth $8.2 million made him an incredibly attractive target for those who specialized in exploiting successful immigrants. The wedding ceremony had lasted 4 hours, with each ritual performed according to ancient Hindu traditions. Ishika and Vikram had walked around the sacred fire 7 times, making vows that were supposed to bind them together for 7 lifetimes. The guests had thrown rose petals and rice, blessing the couple with prosperity and happiness. But what none of them knew was that this entire celebration was built on a foundation of elaborate deception that had taken months to construct. Ishika Mehta was not who she claimed to be. Her real name was Priya, and she was a key operative in an international marriage fraud syndicate that specifically targeted wealthy South Asian immigrants across Australia, Canada, and the United States. The operation was sophisticated beyond anything law enforcement had encountered before, complete with fabricated family histories, professional coaching in cultural traditions, and detailed psychological profiles of their targets. Priya had spent 6 months studying Vikram's life, his preferences, his family background, and his vulnerabilities before their supposedly chance meeting at a Diwali celebration in Sydney. The criminal organization behind Ishika's false identity was led by a woman known only as Auntie Meera, who operated from a legitimate marriage bureau in Delhi while coordinating fraud operations worldwide. The syndicate had already successfully completed 12 marriage scams, stealing over $50 million from unsuspecting victims. Their method was always the same: identify wealthy, lonely immigrants, create the perfect bride, execute a traditional wedding that satisfied family expectations, and then systematically drain the victim's finances before disappearing. But Vikram Sharma was different from their previous targets. His background in cybersecurity and quantum encryption had made him naturally suspicious and methodical. Unknown to Ishika, he had been conducting his own investigation into her background for weeks before the wedding. His quantum computing algorithms had detected inconsistencies in her digital footprint that would have been invisible to conventional investigation methods. Financial records that didn't quite align, family photos with metadata that revealed they had been edited, and social media histories that had been artificially constructed. As the wedding reception continued into the night with elaborate Bollywood dance performances and a 7-course feast prepared by Sydney's most exclusive Indian caterers, Vikram was making his final preparations for a confrontation that would expose the truth about his new bride. He had transferred his most sensitive financial assets to secure accounts, changed all his passwords, and installed hidden surveillance equipment in their honeymoon suite. What he didn't know was that Ishika had her own surveillance equipment and backup plans that included a network of accomplices positioned throughout Sydney. The celebration finally ended at midnight with the traditional bye-bye ceremony, where Ishika tearfully said goodbye to her fake family members who had flown in from India specifically for this elaborate deception. As the couple was escorted to their honeymoon suite on the hotel's top floor, both bride and groom knew that the night ahead would determine everything. But neither of them realized that within 6 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other would be facing life in prison for murder. The presidential suite had been decorated with rose petals and candles, creating a romantic atmosphere that should have been the perfect beginning to their married life. Champagne waited on ice, and the bed was covered with jasmine flowers. As Ishika stood in the marble bathroom, carefully removing her heavy wedding jewelry and changing out of her elaborate outfit, she was mentally preparing for the most dangerous phase of her operation. In a few hours, she would need to access Vikram's secure financial accounts and transfer millions of dollars to offshore accounts controlled by her criminal organization. What she didn't know was that Vikram was in the bedroom, watching her every move through the surveillance system he had installed, finally understanding the full scope of the deception that had consumed months of his life. The quantum computing specialist who had built his fortune on solving impossible problems was about to discover that some problems could only be solved through violence. The fairy tale wedding was about to become a nightmare that would expose the deadly reality of international marriage fraud, and Sydney's harbor would soon reflect the flashing lights of emergency vehicles responding to a crime that would shock the entire immigrant community. Priya had perfected the art of becoming someone else through 12 previous marriages, each one netting her organization between $2 to $4 million before she vanished without a trace. But Vikram Sharma represented something different. He was their highest value target yet, and Auntie Meera had personally assigned her most skilled operative to this case. The preparation had been meticulous. For 6 weeks, Priya lived in a luxury apartment in Delhi, working with accent coaches, cultural consultants, and identity specialists who transformed her from a street-smart con artist into the perfect traditional Indian bride. She memorized detailed family histories, learned classical dance movements, and practiced cooking regional dishes until her performance was flawless. Her handlers provided her with a fabricated childhood in Jaipur, complete with school records, family photographs professionally edited to include her face, and social media accounts that had been carefully constructed over 2 years. But Priya's journey into marriage fraud hadn't begun with luxury and sophistication. 3 years earlier, she had been Priya Sharma, a desperate single mother living in the slums of Mumbai with her 5-year-old daughter Kavya. Her husband had abandoned them when their child was diagnosed with a rare heart condition requiring expensive surgery. Facing medical bills she couldn't afford and a daughter who would die without treatment, Priya had been recruited by the syndicate during her most vulnerable moment. "We can save your daughter," Auntie Meera had promised during their first meeting in a 5-star hotel lobby. "All you have to do is marry well." The organization paid for Kavya's surgery up front, then sent Priya to training facilities where she learned languages, etiquette, and the psychological manipulation techniques needed to make wealthy men fall in love with fictional women. Her first target had been a Toronto businessman who lost $1.8 million before realizing his wife of 4 months had never existed. Each successful operation made Priya more valuable to the syndicate and more trapped within it. The money she earned allowed her to provide for Kavya, who lived safely in a boarding school in Switzerland, believing her mother worked as an international business consultant. But Priya knew the truth. She was a professional predator, and each marriage she destroyed made her more skilled at destroying the next one. Vikram's profile had intrigued her from the beginning. Unlike her previous targets, who were lonely businessmen seeking companionship, he was a brilliant scientist who had built his wealth through innovation and intelligence. The challenge excited her, but it also made her careless. For the first time in her criminal career, Priya began to genuinely admire her target. Vikram's dedication to his work, his respect for his parents, and his surprising vulnerability when discussing his loneliness began to affect her in ways she hadn't expected. Their courtship had followed the syndicate's proven formula. A chance meeting at a Diwali celebration where Priya appeared as the visiting cousin of another guest. Carefully orchestrated encounters at cultural events where she could display her knowledge of traditions and values. Long conversations about family, dreams, and the challenges of maintaining Indian culture while building a life in Australia. Vikram fell in love with Ishikam Mehta, exactly as predicted, but what the syndicate didn't anticipate was that Priya was beginning to fall in love with him as well. The wedding planning phase had been the most dangerous part of the operation. Priya's handlers flew in professional actors to play her family members, created elaborate backstories for each relative, and coached them on maintaining their roles throughout the celebration. But as the ceremony approached, Priya found herself questioning whether she could go through with the final phase, the systematic theft of Vikram's fortune and the destruction of his life. On the morning of their wedding, Priya made a decision that would ultimately seal her fate. She called Kavya at her Swiss boarding school, hearing her daughter's excited voice describe her excellent grades and plans for university. The conversation reminded her why she had entered this world of deception, but also made her realize she wanted something different. For the first time in 3 years, Priya considered the possibility of confessing everything to Vikram and asking for his help in escaping the syndicate. But as she sat in the bridal preparation room, surrounded by makeup artists and costume designers, her phone buzzed with a message from Ani Mira. Phase 2 begins tonight. Transfer confirmation required by 3 a.m. or consequences will follow. The implicit threat was clear. Priya's daughter's safety depended on completing this operation successfully. What Priya didn't know as she walked down the aisle toward Vikram was that her target had already uncovered significant parts of her deception. His quantum algorithms had detected patterns in her digital footprint that revealed professional manipulation. Bank records showed payments from untraceable offshore accounts. Most damaging of all, facial recognition software had identified her in security footage from 3 different airports using 3 different passports with 3 different names. As the sacred fire ceremony concluded and the newlyweds were escorted to their honeymoon suite, both were preparing for a confrontation that would determine everything. Priya was planning to access $8.2 million in assets while simultaneously wrestling with her growing desire to confess and escape. Vikram was preparing to confront a criminal he had fallen in love with, not knowing that his bride was also planning to betray the organization that had controlled her life for 3 years. The stage was set for a collision between love and deception, between justice and survival, and between a master manipulator and a genius who had finally seen through her perfect disguise. At 1:47 a.m., Priya's fingers trembled as she opened Vikram's laptop, not knowing that every keystroke was being recorded by hidden cameras he had installed throughout their honeymoon suite. The quantum computing millionaire sat in the bathroom, watching his bride attempt to steal his life's work through a surveillance system she never suspected existed. The confrontation began when Vikram emerged from the bathroom and found Priya hunched over his computer, her wedding sari replaced by a black dress that made her look like a completely different person. On the screen were offshore banking interfaces and cryptocurrency wallets, tools of professional theft that no innocent bride should have known how to access. Working late on our wedding night, Vikram's voice was calm, but Priya could hear the danger underneath. She spun around, her carefully constructed personality cracking for the first time in months. "Vikram, I can explain this," she said, her accent shifting slightly as stress broke through her professional training. "It's not what it looks like. Really." He moved closer, and Priya noticed he was holding his phone, recording everything. "Because it looks like my wife of 6 hours is attempting to transfer $8.2 million from my accounts to banks in the Cayman Islands." Priya's mind raced through her options. Denial was impossible. The evidence was right there on the screen. Seduction had been her backup plan, but something in Vikram's eyes told her that wouldn't work either. Her only choice was a confession that might save both their lives. "My name isn't Ishikam Mehta," she said quietly. "It's Priya Khurana, and I'm part of an organization that targets wealthy immigrants. But Vikram, I need you to listen to me, because both our lives are in danger." The confession hit Vikram like a physical blow. Despite all his evidence and suspicions, Hearing the truth spoken aloud was devastating. Everything was a lie. The family, the traditions, the way you said you loved me. Not everything, Priya said desperately. The love became real. That's why I was about to confess everything and ask for your help. They have my daughter, Vikram, a 5-year-old girl who will die if I don't complete this operation. Vikram's expression hardened. So your solution was to destroy my life to save hers. I thought I could find another way, Priya said, tears streaming down her face. I've been planning to escape the organization for months. Tonight was supposed to be different. I was going to tell you everything and beg you to help me get Kavya to safety. Help you. Vikram's voice rose with fury. Help the woman who spent 6 months lying to me, who made me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist, who was planning to steal everything I've worked for. The argument escalated quickly, with Priya trying to explain the impossible situation she was trapped in while Vikram struggled with the betrayal of everything he had believed about their relationship. But their confrontation was interrupted by Priya's phone buzzing with an urgent message from honeymoon. Transfer delayed. Activate contingency protocol immediately. Priya's face went white as she read the message. We have to leave now, she said urgently. They know something's wrong. They'll send people to clean up the situation. Clean up? Vikram asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. They'll kill us both, Priya said simply. The organization doesn't leave loose ends. If I can't complete the theft, they'll eliminate me and anyone who can identify them. Vikram looked at his wife, this stranger who had worn the face of the woman he loved, and made a decision that would haunt him forever. Instead of calling the police or helping her escape, his anger and betrayal overwhelmed his reasoning. The brilliant scientist who had built his career on logical problem-solving was about to solve his problem with violence. You destroyed my life, he said quietly, picking up the heavy gold Mangalsutra that Priya had placed on the dresser. You made me believe in something that never existed. Vikram, please. Priya backed away, finally understanding the danger she was in. We can fix this. We can call the authorities together. I'll testify against the organization. I'll help them catch everyone involved. But Vikram was beyond reasoning. The weight of the sacred wedding necklace in his hands seemed to mock everything he had believed about love, trust, and the future they had planned together. This necklace was supposed to represent our eternal bond, he said, advancing toward her. Let's see how eternal it really is. Priya tried to run for the door, but the heavy hotel furniture and her unfamiliarity with the suite's layout slowed her escape. Vikram, driven by rage and betrayal, caught her before she could reach safety. The quantum computing specialist who had never committed a violent act in his life was about to discover that the line between love and murder was thinner than he had ever imagined. Outside their window, Sydney Harbor sparkled peacefully under the morning stars, unaware that within the luxury suite above, a fairy tale marriage was about to end in tragedy. The criminal organization that had orchestrated this elaborate deception was about to lose their most valuable operative, but they would soon discover that sometimes their greatest success could become their most dangerous failure. At 2:43 a.m., Vikram Sharma wrapped the sacred Mangalsutra around Priya's neck for the second time that night. But this time it wasn't a symbol of eternal love. It was a murder weapon. The quantum computing millionaire who had never hurt anyone in his life discovered that betrayal could transform even the most rational person into a killer. The struggle lasted only minutes, but it felt eternal. Priya fought desperately, clawing at Vikram's hands and trying to scream, but the soundproof luxury suite that was meant to ensure their privacy became her tomb. Her perfectly manicured nails, still decorated with intricate henna patterns from the wedding ceremony, left deep scratches on Vikram's arms as she fought for her life. The woman who had deceived him so completely was finally showing him something real, her terror. This is what betrayal feels like, Vikram whispered as he tightened the golden chain. This is what you did to me, except you killed my soul slowly over 6 months. Priya's last words were barely audible. Kavya. Please, save Kavya. Then the presidential suite fell silent, except for Vikram's ragged breathing and the distant sound of Sydney Harbor's morning ferry horns. For 20 minutes, Vikram sat beside his wife's body, staring at what he had done. The brilliant scientist who solved complex quantum equations couldn't comprehend the simple fact that he had just destroyed his own life. His hand shook as he touched Priya's face, still beautiful even in death, still wearing the face of the woman he had loved. Reality crashed over him like a tsunami. He was a murderer. His life was over. Everything he had built, every dream he had nurtured, every relationship he valued was about to be destroyed by these 20 minutes of rage. But instead of calling the police and confessing, Vikram's analytical mind began working on the problem of covering up his crime. He methodically cleaned the suite, removing fingerprints and DNA evidence with the precision he brought to his laboratory work. He staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong, scattering jewelry and cash around the room. But his quantum computing background betrayed him. He was too thorough, too precise. The scene looked artificial to anyone trained to investigate violent crimes. At 4:15 a.m., Vikram checked out of the hotel, telling the night desk clerk that his wife was sleeping and would leave later. He drove to his harborside penthouse, showered, and tried to construct an alibi that would explain his absence from the honeymoon suite. But every plan he developed had fatal flaws that his scientific mind immediately identified. By 6:30 a.m., when hotel housekeeping discovered Priya's body, Vikram was sitting in his home office, paralyzed by the magnitude of what he had done. The woman he had murdered wasn't just a criminal. She was someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone who had been trapped in circumstances beyond her control. Detective Sarachan arrived at the crime scene within 30 minutes, immediately recognizing that this wasn't a random robbery. The victim was still wearing expensive jewelry, cash remained in her purse, and the room showed signs of staging rather than genuine chaos. Most telling of all, the murder weapon, an ornate Indian wedding necklace, suggested this was deeply personal. "Where's the husband?" was Chen's first question. Hotel records showed that Vikram Sharma had checked out hours earlier, claiming a family emergency. Security footage revealed him leaving alone, carrying a suitcase, and moving with suspicious urgency for someone whose wife had supposedly remained in their suite. The forensic evidence told a clear story. Priya had defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating she had fought her attacker. The cause of death was strangulation by ligature, consistent with the Mangal Sutra found near her body. Most damaging for Vikram, the hidden surveillance system he had installed to catch Priya's theft had recorded everything, including his own confession of murder. When police arrived at Vikram's penthouse at 8:47 a.m., they found him waiting in his living room, still wearing his wedding clothes from the night before. He didn't resist arrest or ask for a lawyer. Instead, he quietly asked, "Is there any way to save a 5-year-old girl named Kavya who lives in Switzerland?" Detective Chun realized she had stumbled onto something much larger than a domestic murder. Priya's phone contained contacts with international crime syndicates, evidence of 12 previous marriage fraud operations, and detailed files on other potential victims across Australia. The murder of one criminal had exposed a network that had stolen over $50 million from unsuspecting immigrants. But the investigation also revealed the tragic irony of Priya's death. Hidden in her personal belongings was a handwritten letter addressed to Vikram, dated the morning of their wedding. In it, she confessed everything about her criminal past and begged for his help in escaping the organization and protecting her daughter. She had planned to give him the letter during their wedding night, hoping that love might overcome deception. Vikram had killed the woman he loved just hours before she was going to tell him the truth, and asked for exactly what he would have given her: protection, freedom, and a chance at genuine happiness. The quantum computing specialist who could calculate infinite possibilities had failed to imagine the one scenario that might have saved both their lives. As news of the murder spread through Sydney's Indian immigrant community, the fairy tale wedding that had been celebrated just hours earlier became a cautionary tale about trust, betrayal, and the deadly consequences of secrets that should have been shared. At 9:15 a.m. on February 15th, 2024, Detective Sarachan made the phone call that would save 5-year-old Kavya Khurana's life and expose Australia's largest international marriage fraud operation. But the little girl in Switzerland would grow up knowing that her mother died, trying to escape the criminal world she had entered to save her daughter's life. Vikram Sharma's arrest made international headlines, but the real story emerged during the investigation that followed. Priya's phone contained detailed records of the syndicate's operations across 3 continents, including the locations of other operatives, financial accounts, and most importantly, evidence that could save future victims from the same elaborate deceptions. The Swiss authorities located Kavya at an exclusive boarding school in Geneva, where she had been living under the identity Kavya Mehta, believing her mother worked as an international business consultant. The heartbreaking task of explaining that her mother had died fell to child psychologists who specialize in trauma counseling. Kavya would inherit the money Priya had earned from her criminal activities, over $3.2 million that would ensure her education and future, even as it represented the destruction of other families. Auntie Mira was arrested in Delhi 3 weeks later when international law enforcement agencies coordinated simultaneous raids across 12 cities. Her real name was Dr. Mira Patel, a former psychiatrist who had used her understanding of human psychology to create the world's most sophisticated marriage fraud operation. Her organization had been responsible for 47 fraudulent marriages across Australia, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom, stealing over $127 million for victims. The trial that followed captivated media attention worldwide. Vikram's defense attorney argued that he had been the victim of an elaborate psychological manipulation that had driven him to temporary insanity. The prosecution painted him as a man whose privileged position and wounded pride had led him to commit cold-blooded murder rather than seek legal justice. During his testimony, Vikram read Priya's confession letter aloud in court, his voice breaking as he described finding it among her belongings after her death. "She was going to tell me everything," he said through tears. "She was going to ask for my help, and I would have given it. I killed the woman I loved because I couldn't wait 6 hours to hear the truth." The revelation of Priya's planned confession created unexpected sympathy for both victim and perpetrator. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological trauma experienced by both marriage fraud victims and the criminals trapped within these organizations. The case highlighted the complex reality that some criminals were also victims of systems larger than themselves. Vikram was convicted of voluntary manslaughter rather than premeditated murder, receiving a sentence of 18 years in prison. The judge acknowledged that while his actions were inexcusable, the extraordinary circumstances of psychological manipulation had contributed to his loss of control. The broader investigation led to the rescue of 23 other women who had been coerced into marriage fraud operations, including 12 who were actively targeting victims at the time of the arrests. Most were mothers whose children had been used as leverage to ensure their compliance, mirroring Priya's own tragic circumstances. Kavya Khurana, now 8 years old, lives with adoptive parents in Australia who have maintained contact with Vikram through the prison system. In an unexpected development, Vikram has established a trust fund for her education and created scholarship programs for children of crime victims. He spends his time in prison developing cybersecurity protocols to help detect the types of digital deceptions his wife had used. The luxury hotel where Priya died has converted their presidential suite into offices for a nonprofit organization that assists immigrants in avoiding marriage fraud schemes. A small memorial plaque in the lobby commemorates all victims of international crime syndicates, though it doesn't mention Priya by name. Detective Sarah Chin's investigation led to policy changes in how Australian authorities monitor international marriage arrangements and support immigrants who may be vulnerable to exploitation. The case study is now taught in law enforcement academies worldwide as an example of how traditional crimes have evolved in the digital age. 3 years later, Vikram maintains that his greatest regret isn't the years he lost to prison, but the 6 hours he couldn't wait to hear the truth that might have saved both their lives. In interviews, he describes Priya as both the greatest deception and the most genuine love of his life, a paradox that continues to haunt him. Priya Khurana's story became a symbol of how desperation can trap people in cycles of crime that ultimately destroy everyone involved. Her death ensured that other families would be protected from similar deceptions, but it also demonstrated the tragic cost of secrets that should have been shared and trust that came too late. The fairy tale wedding that lasted only hours had exposed an international criminal network and saved dozens of future victims. But for Vikram Sharma, sitting in his prison cell overlooking Sydney Harbor, the view serves as a constant reminder that love and betrayal, truth and deception, can be separated by nothing more than a few hours of patience he didn't possess. The quantum computing specialist who had built his career on solving impossible equations learned that some problems have no solutions, only consequences that echo through generations.